Did I tell you about the guy who wanted to unalive himself after a woman took his home, his life savings, in less than 2 years? My name is Dr. Aaron Bryant, and I share stories about people whom I have worked with and helped over many, many years as a mental health therapist and also a performance coach. So my stories come from you, from these real life situations. Although I changed the names to protect those I discuss. Others need to understand that these stories are not only true, but they're fairly common with outcomes that are never the same. So in this particular situation, I have a client, not patient, and we will call him Gary. Gary, he's a divorcee and he wanted to relocate after he retired to a location that is affordable. Therefore, after some research, he chose a location in Asia. The details we will not disclose for protection of that particular country. However, this country is known for its beauty, culture, and a really good exchange rate. Therefore, Gary can really stretch his savings and do much more with it within this country, at least versus his current living situation, which is in the United States of America. So Gary does his homework and eventually finds a destination he does like and starts looking around for a place to live. Now, over time, he has visited various locations, but this particular country a few times. And then this happened over a span of a few years and is definitely set on making this his new home. At least that's what he thought by traveling around and experiencing the various parts of Asia. Well, in a particular location, Gary did not do this research alone. He actually hired a local realtor who assisted him in going to various locations and also translated for him when they were in areas where English was not very common. So he was in more of a rural location where the local people were not that fluent. So we'll call this realtor Lee. So Lee is always willing to pick up Gary from the airport. She also assisted him in finding his next home, obviously. I mean, this is her job. She knew the areas most frequented by tourists and areas where expats like to live. And expats are people who, work remotely. And she understood the value of properties and could also explain the advantages to renting versus owning properties in her country and vice versa. So Gary, he loves how knowledgeable Lee is, and although he knew she worked for commission, probably because of how great she was in talking, and that's common for a realtor, but he felt she was very good at her job. And while they were spending times together, and much as they were, and while doing this and looking for a home, Gary started to have feelings for Lee, and they began to talk on personal levels and share their life stories. I mean, Lee also demonstrates some attraction to Gary, and both start to discuss something more personal and permanent when Gary is officially retired and he can relocate on a permanent basis. So Gary's ecstatic. Now, I have known Gary off and on as a client. I've known him for about a year before he starts on this retirement plan. And as I assisted him with his mental state during his divorce, he still calls me from time to time as his virtual therapist, since we do not actually live in the same state, and from time to time he still gives me updates on his well-being, which is something that I ask of all of my clients, and that's just to kind of manage his emotions. This is something I ask because it's necessary to kind of keep a pulse on how your progress is, and when we are not on a regular schedule, something that's consistent, this is something that's helpful. However, I was not aware Gary was considering moving to another country. He kind of left that part out. Nor did I know that he was speaking with another woman so soon after his divorce. Otherwise, I would have strongly advised against it. Now, that I tell my clients not to just do things impulsively. I don't do that. I kind of advise them on the pros and cons based on their mental capacity. And in this case, regarding Gary, I would have definitely warned against it. Another relationship so soon, but I felt that he was still vulnerable, nor had given himself time to find his wings, so to say. And although moving to another country sounded like a good idea, financially speaking, the idea of starting a new life seemed to be something he was intrigued with. However, to start a new relationship, I would say it would be on the impulsive side, to say the least. I want to thank the sponsor, Crank Golf, for supporting the series about sports performance and managing your mental health. Because of sponsors like them, we're able to keep things going and keeping topics fresh. If you want to support this page, please just click subscribe and click the bell so you can get updates on the next topics. Thank you again. So the good news is that Gary, he finds the home he really likes. And according to Lee, he needs to move fast because unlike condos, homes are typically sold because of the value in the land and the property for that matter. However, what Gary does not understand is that the foreigners that come to this country are not allowed to own land. And credit to Gary, he actually researched this. And it was true. I never said Gary was a dummy, but he had no idea what to do next. Remember, he wanted to buy this home, but as you guessed, Lee had an idea by offering to join him in owning this property. Now, by now, Gary thinks they're in a good position for a relationship. And of all people he has met and has gotten to know, he feels he can trust Lee, especially since he has been living with her for the last 3 visits and gotten to know her very well. I mean, it's better than a hotel. I mean, he met her adult son, teenage daughter. He has also met friends of hers. So at this point, they were on all accounts in a relationship. And this was just another step towards the same direction of what he wanted. At least that's what Gary thought. Why not? So they discussed the details that Lee kind of will put the land in her name and Gary will share ownership of the home that he wants to buy, which will also help him financially. At least that's what he's thinking. So that is what Gary does. He signs documents and he makes the purchases of the land and the home that was already built. So it was used. And this allowed him to afford it versus a new condo in which would have probably required payments over time and really hitting his budget. According to Lee, that would make it a challenge for him anyway because he would need a visa already and a bank account, specifically in that country. But to buy land and a used home, it makes it easier and cheaper without the payment plans. So I guess Lee had it all figured out. So with a few modifications and some improvements on his home, Gary felt it was a great deal on this opportunity, which he will soon move into once his retirement is official. And at this time, it was about 8 months and counting. So this is where Gary was signing documents that he could not understand, and the legal information, as it was in foreign language, he could not even interpret. And Gary did not get a lawyer. He trusted his realtor, Lee, to explain, and he signed and paid the money in full for both land and property. They even had a notary, whom in this country was a legal representative, sort of the equivalent of our lawyers. So he was feeling very confident with trust. After everything, Gary was very pleased, and he and Lee went out to celebrate once the documents were signed. Lee even offered to pay, which Gary felt, well, hey, it must be because she got some commission for the home. So he was quite happy. She earned it, by, for that matter, all her hard work in assisting him. However, months passed, and now Gary's doing his taxes in the U.S. And he attempted to identify and report his new property and loss of savings in a foreign country, as any good standing tax-paying citizen within the United States would do. Only the paperwork he submitted did not quite support what he was claiming. In short, what he was holding was a deed with notarized signatures gifting his property to the same owner of the land that he purchased. So although he was reporting a loss of savings, there was nothing else to report on his taxes other than his normal income and debts that he does every year. So obviously Gary was very concerned. After multiple attempts to contact Lee and her real estate office, Gary was quite unsuccessful. So what did Gary do? He tried to hire an international lawyer from the US, which he should have done in the first place. And he stated that although he would try, he would not recommend pursuing this, according to the lawyer. And that was because it was clear that he had gifted this property to the same person he thought was his trusted friend and girlfriend. And after this unfortunate reality, Gary started to go into a spiral of depression. And it was, very unfortunate. And then he stumbled on one of my past podcast series discussing depression. Thank goodness, because this led to him calling me back and he and I scheduled regular conversations once again. My goal was not to focus on Gary's mistake because he already understood that. Where he went wrong, it was my purpose to focus on how he, unlike many others at his age, he still had his health and his job. Since he had not officially submitted his retirement papers, and I even joked that it was a good thing they did not give him a retirement party yet, because he would have to return all the presents, which he probably wouldn't even known who gave what. So Gary is okay at this time. He is not retired. He is continuing to work and he is focusing on rebuilding his money and his savings, and he does not have a girlfriend. He and I have talked about his mental state to his decision making, which is important to discuss because we want him to not make the same choices. People tend to look at the ultimatum when there is an extreme loss or situation that appears to be unbearable. I get it. You feel there is nowhere to turn and the pain is often unbearable, and a person feels that choosing an ultimatum is the answer. It never is. All decisions are temporary and can be altered or even changed, but your life is not a finality you want to choose and take away. So thank you for watching. This is The Mental Blueprint with Dr. Bryant. I look forward to our next discussion. Be safe.